Strongly. What does that do to the U.S.-China economic relationship? What do you got on that?
And what does
Susan?
very strongly mean? So let's first of all talk about what's happening in Hong Kong, because as you see, a lot of people are upset about this new national security law. Some people see this as a knockout punch for the pro-democracy movement and the ongoing Hong Kong protests in the city. So it's called a national security law, but many people see this as basically China muscling in. And you will see Chinese agents now physically, literally on the streets of Hong Kong, something that has never been done because they've been hiding out in their covert garrisons as respected by the Sino-British treaty that mandated the handback of Hong Kong back to Chinese rule. But you saw Chinese stocks and Hong Kong stocks in particular plummeting some 5%, the worst single-day sell-off in 5 years, because people understand that with this national security law, which means that Beijing can now govern Hong Kong, they can institute laws that they pass independently of what Hong Kong thinks. That means that the Hong Kong that free capitalist market investors have grown to know and love is gone.
Yeah, look, to me, this is personal. I got my start in the media in Hong Kong. I lived there for a couple of years. My heart goes out to those brave people who stood up to the communist regime and are going to continue to stand up to it. But I think the light of freedom is flickering in Hong Kong right now. I think you used to live there as well, Susan.
I did, and it's very sad speaking to my friends who are obviously very concerned about what's happening there and whether or not their freedoms that they enjoyed under British rule will still be kept, because it looks like indications are, with these ongoing new rules and laws and the encroachment of Beijing, that things are definitely not the same anymore. Now, they are also wondering what the U.S. response will be, because we heard President Trump saying that there will be a strong reaction, but also we have senators saying that they're proposing bills sanctioning Chinese officials that pass this law.
Yeah, talk to me real fast about this. China wants to retake full control of Hong Kong. Let's get an update on that. Susan, what did the chief executive say?
Yeah, it's a power grab, and also infringes, by the way, on a lot of the freedoms that were promised in 1997 when Hong Kong was handed back to China from British rule. So we did just hear from Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, hugely unpopular, I should mention, and also chosen by Beijing. And she, of course, agrees with this new Hong Kong security bill. If we can bring up the quote for you. So Carrie Lam here says that the decision, she says, only targets acts of succession, subverting state power, and organizing, carrying out these terrorist activities, in her words, as well as activities interfering with the Hong Kong's internal affairs by foreign or external forces. And you have to read between the lines here, because I think it sounds like she's hinting that maybe it's the U.S. as part of this foreign interference. Now, of course, the Secretary of State Pompeo has responded this morning to this as well, in the so-called power grab by China over Hong Kong. And Pompeo says that the decision to bypass Hong Kong's well-established legislative processes, ignores the will of the people of Hong Kong, would be a death knell for the high degree of autonomy that Beijing promised for Hong Kong under that 1997 handover. And this bill allows Beijing to essentially pass laws without Hong Kong's consent. In the future, you'll also see Chinese security forces on the streets of Hong Kong, something that you haven't seen for over a century. But also people are reading the tea leaves here, Stu, and thinking this might be a dare from Beijing to Trump and the U.S. to say, what are you going to do about it?
Look, bottom line, for both you and I, Susan, breaks my heart. Absolutely breaks my heart to see those freedom-loving people trampled like this by a communist regime.
For the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. We saw those frustrations really playing out to the Hong Kong legislature yesterday, with scuffles breaking out between the pro-establishment, the pro-Beijing camp versus those that are for democracy. So it looks to be that China will be passing this Hong Kong security law, which enables Beijing to enact laws that they pass without Hong Kong's input. And also in the future, you'll see Chinese military personnel on the streets of Hong Kong, something that you haven't seen in over a century. Now, what is the U.S. response? We heard from the Secretary of State this morning, Mike Pompeo, issuing this statement on Hong Kong, saying that the decision to bypass Hong Kong's well-established legislative processes and ignores the will of the people of the city would be a death knell for the high degree of autonomy that Beijing promised for Hong Kong under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And that is the case. So when the British colony, of course, was handed back to Chinese rule back in 1997, they were promised autonomy for 50 years. years. And this, of course, some of the infringements on these freedoms sparked the year-long protests that we saw last year. Now, Carrie Lam, the embattled Hong Kong chief executive, highly unpopular in the city, says that the decision only targets acts of secession, subverting state power, and organizing and carrying out terrorist activities, as well as activities interfering with the Hong Kong internal affairs by foreign or external forces. Now, if you read into that, there is some finger pointing at possibly the U.S. government involvement. However, there is scant evidence that that is true. But if you take a look at the Hong Kong stock reaction, seeing the worst single-day sell-off in half a decade, down over 5%, I think global investors understand that this overreach by China, this continuing overreach by China, means the end of Hong Kong as the financial capital in Asia. With this new Hong Kong security bill, Beijing is in many ways daring the U.S. and the Trump administration to respond. So yes, it is a U.S.-China relationship problem. And we're seeing this overhang right now in these Chinese players that are listed here in the U.S. So we're talking about the Alibabas of this world and the Baidus. And we know that the relationship between the U.S. and China have deteriorated during this pandemic spread. And it looks like that divide continues to grow. Now, when this bill does pass, and it is expected to pass China's rubber stamp parliament, it essentially allows China to pass laws that govern Hong Kong without Hong Kong's input whatsoever. Also in the future, you'll see Chinese security forces on the streets of Hong Kong, something that you haven't seen for over a century. And this pretty much, some say, is a knockout punch for the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. You saw some fisticuffs and some of those fists flying in the Hong Kong legislature yesterday. As you see here, the pro-democracy politicians going up against a pro-establishment, Beijing-friendly politicians. Now, as you mentioned, President Trump has said that the U.S. will respond strongly if China moves on Hong Kong, a sentiment that was echoed last night by parts of his administration. Listen.
Unfortunately, some 27 years early, the Chinese Communist Party has decided that there's too much freedom in Hong Kong. They don't want to allow them to have their way of life or their capitalist system. If China moves forward and takes strong action under this new national security law against the people of Hong Kong, America will respond.
Now, Hong Kong was promised 50 years of autonomy in 1997 when the British handed back the colony and the territory back to China. However, many people in the younger generation and amongst most of the Hong Kong people feel that their freedoms are being eroded even faster than that timeline. And many say that because of that infringement by Beijing and this overstep and overreach by China, Hong Kong's, shall we say, leadership in free markets is fastly disappearing. And their leadership when it comes to being the financial capital in China, in Asia, is also dissipating as well. You saw that last night with Hong Kong stocks falling some 5%, which is the worst sell-off, single-day sell-off in 5 years, nearly half a decade. And some say that maybe it's time to move your money outside of Hong Kong. Neil?